Once upon a time, there was a beautiful school in a wonderful neighborhood, and the school was called Ancaster Meadow. It was full of great students, a fantastic staff, and a wonderful principal, Miss Laporte. One day, Miss Laporte called a meeting with all the staff, and she said these words.
In June, I'm going to retire.
Oh no, thought the staff. What shall we do? We need to make another principal that's just as great as Miss Laporte. So they all went back to their classrooms and they talked to their students. Their students were so upset about this news that they thought of a plan. They searched the internet and they found a recipe for a wonderful principal. Early the next morning, all the students sneaked into the school, tiptoed into the kitchen and started to bake. They poured and stirred, measured and mixed until their concoction was done. Then into the oven it went. Now the very last line of the recipe was an important one. Don't open the oven until the 15 minutes are up. But the children didn't listen. After just 5 minutes, they smelled something so wonderful that they just had to peek. And out of the oven popped a very little, but very fast principal. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and in her loud principal voice said,
Run, as fast as you may. You can't catch me. I'm the principal today.
And off she ran, out the corridor and down the hall. All the children started chasing after her, but before too long, she came across Mrs. Howe.
Just a minute, I have a quick question for you.
The principal stared at her and said,
Run, as fast as you may. You can't catch me. I'm the principal today.
And off she ran with all the children and Mrs. Howe chasing after her. Before too long, she ran into Miss Dunsiger. With her iPad in hand, Miss Dunsiger said,
Now, wait just a minute. I have one quick email I need approved before it goes out.
The principal stared at her and said,
Run, as fast as you may. You can't catch me. I'm the principal today.
and off she ran with all the children, Mrs. Howe, Miss Dunsiger chasing after her. Before too long, she ran into Miss Doyle. Miss Doyle took one look at the principal and said,
You're just the person I need. Come into my classroom for a minute.
The principal stared at her and said,
Run, as fast as you may. You can't catch me. I'm the principal today.
and off she ran with all the children, Mrs. Howe, Miss Dunsiger, and now Miss Doyle, chasing after her. She hadn't made it very far when she came across Mrs. Money.
You're just the person I'm looking for. Can you come into my classroom and then talk to my kids after recess?
The principal stared at her and said,
Run, as fast as you may. You can't get me. I'm the principal today.
and off she ran with all the children, Mrs. Howe, Miss Dunsiger, Miss Doyle, and now Mrs. Money chasing after her. The new principal barely made it back up the hall when she ran into a very angry Miss Laporte.
Now, wait just a minute, you people. The day is about to begin. Get on your way to start the day. And children, I shouldn't see you in.
The new little principal watched and she listened too. With just these words, all the children turned around and happily walked outside, and all of the teachers strolled merrily back to their classrooms. There was no running in the halls, and there was no long list of questions. Everyone was getting to work, doing what they were supposed to do, and having fun too. Wow, this new little principal had a lot to learn. She took a look at Miss Laporte and said,
I run from the children who run from me and from the teachers too. But being a future principal, I will not run from you.
Thank you.
said Miss Laporte.
Now come on in with me. Let's have a talk about this wonderful school. You'll love it here. You'll see.
And so in June, Miss Laporte left, and the staff and students were all sad to see her go. But because of what she did that day, they knew that all would be well next year too. As they would say in a fairy tale, they all lived happily ever after.
Thank you, Miss Laporte, for